In the tapestry of life, where every thread holds a story, America in black and white emerges as a haven for the voices echoing through the heart of our communities. In this podcast, we wade through the rivers of our collective experiences, celebrating the vibrant hues of change brought forth by the whispers of hope and the roars of action. It's more than just a conversation. It's a journey into the heart of our society, illuminated by the light of those daring to dream and do. Join us, and let your voice be the melody that guides us toward a dawn where every color finds its place in the masterpiece of our shared destiny. Together, let's paint a future brimming with the positives that dwell in our minds and the actions that shape our.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of America in Black and White. I'm your host, Charles King. Tonight, we're going to start the show with a Black history reflection of Jesse Owens. Jesse Owens was born in 1913, was a trailblazing African-American athlete whose courage and excellence transcended racial barriers and global politics. At the 1936 Berlin Olympics, Owens won 4 gold medals, defying Adolf Hitler's ideology of Aryan supremacy and proving that talent, determination, and dignity now know no color. His triumph became a symbol of resilience and pride for generations of Black Americans, reminding us that greatness often emerges from adversity. Owens' legacy continues to inspire leaders like Reginald Mebane, who embodies perseverance, excellence, and transformative leadership in every sphere they touch. Tonight, let me introduce our guests and we'll get into the show. In every generation, there are leaders who rise from humble beginnings to redefine what leadership means. Tonight, we welcome one such visionary, Reginald Mebane. From the loading docks of FedEx to the executive boardrooms of corporate America and the halls of public service at the CDC, Reggie's journey is a masterclass in resilience, purpose, and transformation. His story reminds us that leadership is not about titles or positions. It's about impact, integrity, and the courage to lift others as you climb. As we explore his life, his work, and his wisdom, we celebrate a man who embodies the spirit of America in black and white, truth, clarity, and the community empowerment. Ladies and gentlemen, Reggie Mebane, let's welcome him to the show. Hello, sir.
Hello, how are you? Good to see
All
you
righty,
again.
welcome back.
Welcome back.
How are you?
I'm doing extremely well, sir. It's about 80 something degrees here in Atlanta, Georgia, and we're preparing to kick off the book tour in May. So a lot of good things have happened since the last time we talked. As a matter of fact, last time we talked, the book had just come out about a week or so before. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Well, before we get into the show, is there anything you'd like to say to our audience before we get into it?
Yes, I think the most important thing I'd like to say is that one of the reasons why I believe I'm here on earth is to do exactly what we're doing here, Charles, is that's sending the elevator back down. Whatever I have, I'm willing to share, because once you share, you begin to create legacy and you change people's lives. So it's all about sending the elevator back down and doing what you're doing, providing a platform, because our stories matter.
Mm-hmm. So, well, let's start with your life story and early journey. And can you tell us, what do you remember most vividly about your early days at FedEx?
Well, the first time, actually, my first memory of FedEx was in January of 1981, and it was like 20 degrees outside. And they asked me to go outside on the loading dock and unload this 18-wheeler truck. And I almost froze to death. And I started not to come back the next day because, man, that was just brutal. But at the end of the day, it was 23 years out of my life, and I couldn't be more proud to have worked for such a company. So that was my first memory of FedEx. But the other thing about FedEx that I think so many other folk who came along during my time was that they spent an inordinate amount of time and effort in allowing us to be able to go to training and also to be able to get promoted from within. How else would a poor kid like me from the Dixie Homes Housing Project start out unloading trucks and become a chief operating officer of a $2 billion company?
Wow. Well, that in itself, that says a lot, because I think that's all about the great opportunity that you got. And, when you do have that opportunity, sometimes, a lot of people don't take advantage of those. But apparently, it was worth the wherewithal for you to actually continue that and to continue to build yourself. Um, how, how did those experiences shape your leadership philosophy?
Well, I spent 2 years at the United States Air Force Academy, and we had to go through survival, evasion, resistance, and escape. And I remember when I left the academy to finish my undergraduate studies, it took me years to stop saying yes, sir, no, sir. Sir, may I ask a question? Sir, may I make a statement? No excuse, sir. But that discipline at the Air Force Academy also segued into the discipline that we were taught at FedEx. When they said they wanted those packages there absolutely positively overnight, that's exactly what they meant. And we were so dedicated, and so many resources were dedicated to us to be able to be trained and be ready, that we were able to make sure that even though the packages didn't get delivered that night, we would take our cars, load those packages that were left over into our cars, drive to the airport next door, expedite those packages on a commercial airline just to make sure they got there on time, and come back in the next night and do it all over again. But the training that we got and the dedication and knowing that the company was investing in us made all the difference in the world in terms of our loyalty and why we were so sure that absolutely positively those packages would get delivered. Those are the lessons that I learned, and being able to also go to the FedEx Leadership Institute and spend 2 years at the FedEx Leadership Institute traveling and teaching around the world, leadership and management and coaching, learning the difference between leadership and management and how those two are critical and must be merged to create the kind of leadership that you need then and now.
So, what motivated you to pursue excellence despite humble beginnings?
It had to do in the beginning with my mom. My mom and dad separated when I was 10 years old, but my dad died when I was 12. As you know, since the last time we talked, that I actually saw my father die of a heart attack in front of me. But I got up and went to school the very next day. And the reason I got up and went to school the very next day and did not miss a day out of school in 12 years, Charles, because number one, even though my dad had like a fifth grade education, he demanded that we come in and do our homework because he knew education was the key. But also to see my mom, who worked as a cook, who worked as a waitress, the discipline that she had many times, after he died, being able to provide for her family and get tips and bring them home. The discipline that she had, many times she didn't feel well or she had been in an abusive situation, but she still went to work. So the discipline was instilled in me as part of my DNA. But the other story I may remind you was the school that I went to, Carnes Elementary, the first day of school when I'm crying and Miss Brady calls me over and introduces me to Mr. Fix-It, aka the razor strap, saying if you don't stop that foolishness and go over there and do what you're supposed to do, then you're going to get acquainted with Mr. Fix-It. Those teachers on the way, they don't have teachers like that anymore, but I was scared straight for 12 years.
Mm. Who were your mentors or role
I'm
models
frozen.
during your rise?
Say that one more time. We got
Who were your mentors or role models during your rise?
they were all around me. They were our godparents. In the community, you have parents that look after you. We call them godparents, even though they're not your biological parents. I had godparents. I call them angels in the ghetto. We all had godparents that favored us, that were role models for us. But then the teachers and the guidance counselors, there were role models everywhere we turned, because especially during that era coming up in the late 60s and early 70s, excellence was a way of life. And so understanding that, failure was not an option, there were role models everywhere you looked. And also there were role models everywhere you didn't look. I read a quote most recently that said, I've also in my life been able to witness there are so many people that I saw that I did not want to be like, and that in and of itself was a blessing. So there were role models all around me, especially in the teachers and guidance counselors that gave us that support along the way.
How did you navigate challenges of race and representation in corporate America?
I first had to learn that there was such a thing as racism. My first exposure that I remember for racism, there were a couple of things that influenced me. Number one, I remember when Dr. King got shot, and the night that he got shot, my dad went to pick my mom up from the hospital where Dr. King was taken because she worked there. And I remember him very vividly putting a pistol in his pocket and telling us not to open the doors unless he came back because he was going to pick up my mom. I knew something was wrong and something was amiss in terms of the balance related to race then. And then I learned later on when I won a scholarship to Exeter Prep School, where we went on a field trip from Exeter to Andover, and I was walking down the street with my little white girlfriend, and actually there were race riots in Boston at the time, and these guys started to chase me. And I didn't know why they were chasing me, but they were trying to, I guess, get me to kidnap me or kill me, because I'm very sure had I not made it back to the bus on time, that I would not be sitting here talking to you today. That was my first real exposure to racism. And then subsequent to that, once you segue into corporate America, you begin to see a lot of times when you're the only person of color in the room, whether it's the boardroom or the meeting room, you begin to see that sometimes you're treated as if you're invisible, i.e. a ghost. And many times, sometimes you might say something and it's not taken seriously. You begin to see those nuances that let you know that there's something different here. But I have to learn through social and emotional intelligence to navigate those environments so that regardless of that, I still have to be able to get things done and to be successful. And not only to be successful, but to thrive in those environments, despite the racism that I witnessed day in and day out.
Although that experience was a long time ago, how were you able to transform yourself in order to deal with situations like that, to continue to thrive and to grow, and just be that strong person that you are right now?
I think part of it is in your DNA, and part of it is through learned environment situations that happen to you. I think that one of the things that you develop over the years is the whole idea of social intelligence. In other words, when you start out with emotional intelligence, that's one thing, learning how you interact and empathize and connect to others. But the real key, the real goal is through social intelligence. When you learn through mistakes, when you learn through threats, when you learn from the streets how to survive, you begin to develop an ability or a ghost inside of you that helps you hone that GPS so that you can go into a situation and be able to do an environmental scan and know intuitively, where the power is, who has how the money works, etc. But I learned those skills on the streets first, and those same skills that you learn on the streets, you learn that they segue into the same survival skills that you need in corporate America. Go to any meeting or any boardroom, you know that you got the power players at the table, supporting cast around the wall. At any given time, if you say something, it could be a career-ending move or career-ending statement. So you learn how to navigate those things. But the very same rules that allowed me to survive being threatened and almost getting killed in prep school, same set of rules that I learned from people on the streets that I knew that were in gangs, those same rules apply from the streets to the boardroom, which in essence ties into the ghost at the table as well, because those are lessons that I learned that you couldn't teach me, that weren't written down in a book, but now I have those as part of my GPS encyclopedia.
Mm. So, what lessons did you learn about perseverance and self-belief?
Perseverance started when you realize that poverty is real. You also realize that, you know, you learn to have a delayed sense of gratification. I remember that many times we didn't get new Christmas toys, that we were given toys by other people, or my godmother who went to clean houses and brought toys home from these other families' home. But I never felt in those situations, even though we didn't have very much, that I was deprived in any way. I refused from the beginning of time to be a part of the Victim Olympics. I don't know where that came from, Charles. I know that in your family, for example, you have traits that are passed on. And for three of my family members, myself and my brother, one of my sisters, you know, same tapestry, same garden, same set of rules, and same family. We're surviving. Then you have sometimes one person that's an outlier that sometimes feels like they are a victim and things happen to them, that life is doing something to them. But in the end, it starts with, for as early as I can remember, from being a child, even, you know, being as young as 2 years old and getting my first spanking from my dad because I was crying, you know, learning that resilience matters and that it's not the end of the world, even though you might think it's the end of the world. And you learn also that many times it's just being able to get through the day and to persevere. That's the real thing that helps you to understand that it's not the end of the world. You might think it is because you're going through it, but in the end, the key is to continue to persevere, to wake up every single morning and decide whether or not you're going to be a victim or whether or not you're going to continue moving forward.
So, did you use situations like that as like a form of motivation, especially when you expanded out to get to the point of being an author?
Yes, my whole life, your life is your resume. Let's start with that. So everything that has happened to me and everything that happens to anyone, everything that you do is connected to and leads to everything else that you end up doing. And many times when you're going through situations, you aren't able to see that connected thread. You can't see the connected tissue. Every time I had a success or a failure, every time a door was closed, it happens that that door closed so that I could look at the doors in front of me. Many times when we're faced with adversity and doors closed in front of us, we think that's the end of the world. But if you're focused on the doors that close, you can't see what the doors are in front of you. And I learned that again from my parents, from my guidance counselors, from my teachers. Don't get me wrong. There have been times in my life when I thought, you know, it was over in terms of a failure, in terms of a job that I didn't get. But I refuse to remain just to wallow in what happened, but continue to look forward. So the same lessons that I learned on the playground about how to survive are the same lessons I learned in corporate America. And I've also felt all along in my life that somewhere inside of me, I was an author. I've always been an author, and everybody has a story to tell. And so, as you know, I wrote this book over 7 years ago, and I was able to release it once I retired from the federal government. So I've also written other books, but in the end, I've always loved to write. As a kid, I was a voracious reader. I would read anything, the milk carton, the cereal box. I love to read in front of the class. I volunteered to do the announcements in church because Frederick Douglass said that once you learn to read, you are forever free. Once you learn to read, you're forever free. So I learned that lesson early on, and I'm still a voracious reader. So that translated into me being able to write. Even today, I spend 2 hours recalibrating and reinventing myself every Friday for a couple of hours. You know, I'm writing down the things that I recorded on my voice memo on my phone, translating those things into stories and to words. So I've always been a writer, but now I have the opportunity to be able to write even more.
Your psychology background influenced your leadership approach.
Mm-hmm. When I worked at Midtown Mental Health Center in Memphis, Tennessee, I tell people I've had several careers. You know, the career at FedEx, the career as an adjunct professor at 3 different universities, my career in teaching at the FedEx Leadership Institute, and also my career as a senior executive. I think that those things all tied together in the sense that what I want to ultimately be able to do is to be able to write so that it has impact and ultimately be able to show that how critical our stories are. There is somebody out there right now that are listening to this podcast that will be inspired by it. And if it's just one person that gets inspired, then that's okay with me. So again, kudos to you for opening the door, for providing this platform, but also by having others listening in and encourage them to try to realize their dreams and then continue to write and to continue to learn becomes a way of life.
So, what personal values guided you through your career transitions?
First of all, the first rule of the first value is to learn to survive. And I'll give you a good example. One of the things that you learn is that if you're going to be able to change the system, you first have to be able to get into the system. You know, you can throw rocks from outside the window all you want to, but there's two kinds of people. There's the person that's in the arena that's fighting every day, trying to make change from within the system. And there are those on the outside who criticize, especially now in the digital age where everybody's got an opinion, everybody is an influencer. But in the end, if you want to change the system, whatever system you're in, you know, you have to be a part of the system. You've got family systems, you've got fraternities, you've got companies, you've got churches. There's all kinds of systems. But when you understand systems thinking, you first have to be able to be a part of that system and ultimately learn what the unwritten rules are and be able to impact change wherever you can. There was a great debate at one time between Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois. And the debate was Booker T. Washington felt that we need to be able to be integrated into the system, to be able to have jobs that provided us vocational ways of life. W.E.B. Du Bois, on the other hand, thought that we could use our minds to break free of the shackles and ultimately be successful. And I think that even though there was a debate between the two of them, somewhere in the middle was where the truth needed to be. But going back to the way that Booker T. Washington thought, I too thought that if I'm going to be able to survive and change this system and open doors for others, I first have to be able to get into the system. So when I was recruited to come to the CDC as a senior executive or a member of the senior executive service, and you know what that means, right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, there's a real severe background check and financial check, et cetera. I had books on the market, Charles. One was called The Unwritten Rules, and the other one, as I mentioned last time, was I Wish Cotton Was a Monkey. I got a very interesting call. They said that if you want to become a member of the senior executive service, you might want to take your books off the market. They seem a little militant. So I thought about it, and I said, okay, do I really want to become a member of the senior executive service, which is the equivalent to being an admiral or general in the military, or will I pass it up and leave the books out there? But I'm glad I decided to take the books off the market. Number one, because I'm a much better writer now than I was then. But number two, if I was going to change the system and become the guy who signs the contract to help create modern vaccine supply chain, and also become the EEO officer for the CDC, impacting policy, impacting the system, I never would have been able to do that from the outside. So learning how to, first of all, get into the system and survive, but then to thrive and to understand what the unwritten rules are. So you have to be able to change from within instead of standing on the outside throwing rocks and criticizing people who are actually in the arena.
Mm. So how did your family and upbringing influence your work ethic?
Everybody in my family had a strong work ethic. And even though in the past there were minimum wage jobs, everybody got up and went to work. And especially, as I said, my mom, my dad, they went to work every single day. My dad was what I would call a functional alcoholic, but he always went to work. He never missed a day out of work. And my mom, same thing. She worked day and night, did anything that she could to try to make sure that there was a roof over our heads and we had food to eat. And so I was surrounded by people in our community who had a strong work ethic, both inside my family and outside of my family. And then going back to where I went to grade school and high school, all those teachers along the way would not let us fail. And that discipline that they instilled in us led us to continue to pursue excellence.
Mm. So what does success mean to you today compared to when you started?
Well, I think you go through phases in your career and in your life. When I first started, I first wanted to be able just to have a job. For example, to be able as a teenager to be able to get a car and do some of those things and buy clothes that you weren't able to afford. But also, as I was entered into the world of corporate America, it was all about the climb, eyes on the prize in terms of getting to the next level and getting to the next level. Nobody sees, like the iceberg, what goes on underneath the surface for you to be able to achieve a certain level of success. Nobody sees the grind, but in the end, they see the success that that's overt. But the discipline to make sure that I stay focused on trying to make that climb, but also early on making a lot of money. At the end of the day, let's not get it twisted. Money was very important. I had a young family and raised twin daughters. Money was very important. But as I continue to evolve in my leadership philosophy and my management career, it was always more important to me as well to make sure that the higher I go, that I'm helping other people along the way. I'm a strong believer in mentoring, been mentoring all my life. I ran mentoring circles for 20 or 30 years at FedEx and the CDC. I still do mentoring circles. As a matter of fact, I have a mentoring circle coming up for CDC. They asked me to come back next Monday to do a mentoring circle for the National Center for Immunization and Respiratory Diseases. So mentoring is a way of life, but servant leadership is a way of life. So they're tied together. So I continue to mentor. Even now, I have mentored so many people that I've lost count. But at the end of the day, if you come to me, whatever I have in terms of time, in terms of knowledge, in terms of resources, I'm going to make sure that you get it, because I saw my mom do that when I was young, give away resources that we didn't have and invite people in off the street that we didn't know sometimes to stay with us. So being able to help others and mentor others, it's not just something you do when you're at work, it's who I am, and it's a way of life.
So let's transition over to your author and memoir insights. And so tell us this wonderful news about, now that the book is published, that you're getting ready to do a book tour. Tell us about that.
So as you know, the book came out in November and we sold out within 30 days. And so as of this week, we're about to do a second printing, and we're about to embark on a book tour. The first stop is going to be here in Atlanta at the Buckhead Club on May the 30th. And then we're going to look at DC and some other locations as we move over the next 3 to 6 months. And also there are several things that are in between. But to me, this is the culmination of a lifetime of work and being able to share this story, but more importantly, being able to impact lives. Because I know, to my CEO of the publishing company, it's about selling books. But for me, more personally, it's about being able to tell the story. And I know my publisher believes in that as well, and believes in me and believes in my story. Our stories matter now more than any other time in the world. So we kicked the book tour off here in Atlanta on the 30th of May. And then we're going to look at DC and Chicago and a couple of other locations. Memphis, Tennessee, definitely in June, going back to my roots. I'm going to talk to my former managers and employees at FedEx. We were unable to do it because of the snowstorm this year in December. But I look forward, to me, going back to FedEx as a homecoming. The fact that they want to still hear from me and to be able to share that message, and starting out just like they did many times in the FedEx hub and working your way up through the system is really important to me. So we have stops along the way over the next 3 to 6 months, and we want to make sure that we get the story out, but also allow other people and hear their stories as well as I continue to learn. So the book tour is important, but the most important thing about the book tour, we believe, is to be able to tell the story and the narrative, and to encourage other people to tell their stories as well.
Mm. So what inspired you to write The Ghost at the Table?
The first book that I wrote, I Wish Cotton Was a Monkey, was the embryonic episode of the book where I started to write about how we are psychologically as human beings. When I was a psychotherapist in private practice, I wanted to do more than just be behavioral therapy. So I actually got a certification in clinical hypnosis. And because I really wanted to understand how the unconscious mind works. And our life is a series of patterns and imprints. And so I learned early on that there are unconscious things about us that drive who we are. And sometimes we don't know if those forces are at work. So as a psychotherapist, I specialize in working with women who were abused, and I work with gang members. But it was all about understanding how the unconscious mind works. Once you begin to understand that so much of who we are operates unconsciously, that by the time a child is 3 years old, they develop concrete operational thinking skills. By the time that child is 12 or 13, their personalities are pretty much set in terms of who they're going to be. You also understand that so much of who we are is beneath the surface. So writing The Ghost at the Table was a story that I had in my head for a long time. But The Ghost at the Table is simply a manifestation of understanding how our unconscious mind continues to influence us. When I'm in a boardroom or a meeting, for example, and I'm the only one in the room, I'm speaking for my ancestors and for the folk who don't have a voice in that room. And many times That's one version of the ghost, but the other version of the ghost is sometimes when you're in those rooms and you're the only one, they speak as if you're not in the room. And that's where you begin to learn how they really think. And the idea is to make them think you're playing by their rules while you quietly play by your own so that you can survive and thrive. But most importantly, be able to be an agent of change within that system. So there are several aspects to the ghost at the table, but the unconscious mind and being a psychotherapist, you begin to understand that so much of who we are is unconscious. And so you begin to also understand these forces affect us every single day of our lives. As I'm sitting here right now, I'm sitting on the shoulders of my ancestors. I'm sitting on the shoulders of the people who don't have this platform that you want to hear the same stories and similar stories so that they can share that so that others can be inspired. So the unconscious mind is alive and is real. And the driver of who we are, most of the time, most of who we are is unconscious. You don't see it. I was watching a TV series the other day, and it said that there are no normal people. It just looks that way from across the street. All of us have these unconscious motives, these unconscious aspirations, and most of the time we don't know what those things are.
Mhm. So, what was the most challenging part of sharing your story?
The most challenging part of sharing my story was sometimes having to go back and review some of the painful things that happened to you in your life. You know, I said, you may think that it's the worst thing that happened to you and that, you know, the world has come to an end. One of the things that I still remember today, as if it happened yesterday, was when my father died and watching him die of a heart attack right in front of me. And so that's not a pleasant memory, but it's a necessary memory because I continue to remember that as a source of inspiration in knowing that he wanted me to go to school and to break the bonds of poverty through education. Also going through some of the situations where I saw my mom had to live through in terms of abusive things that happened to her, things that she had to do to make sure that we had food on the table and a roof over our heads. So revisiting some of those things is not always easy, but at the end of the day, if you don't have the pain, you can't appreciate the glory. And I think that those are the necessary things that make up who we are, and we have to appreciate the good, the bad, and the ugly.
You know, so as we think about not just your story, but the things that you're talking about in that memoir,
Mm-hmm.
can you tell us how does those traumas from your childhood, or if they still have some impact on you now, and if so, how are you able to get past those things to where they are not affecting you as much as they used to?
I'll start out with the premise that we are all recovering. We all have
Right.
some form of trauma. We've all had things that happen to us that have been unpleasant. And I've been blessed with a positive mindset my whole life. And so I have also learned that the ability to be able to compartmentalize as a tool in my toolbox in order to be able to survive. In other words, when I was young, I was very caught up into how I feel. But as you gain education and wisdom and discernment over the years, you begin to see that feelings have their place, but I won't live a life where I'm driven by how I feel. I've learned to be able to have discernment, to be able to put things in the right compartment until I need to deal with them. And that only comes through the lived experience and an authentic life where you've had both trauma and success, and learning that, I don't have to solve every problem overnight. I don't have to solve every problem, every single day. But if you have an incremental approach to life in understanding that, yes, this thing happened to me today, what is the most important thing that I need to do now? And then what's the next thing I need to do beyond that? If you can control how you feel and compartmentalize enough to be able to control how you think, you actually have control of your life, because your thoughts determine your feelings, et cetera, determines your destiny, your circle of influence, et cetera. So you have to learn how to control your thinking. There's a book that came out a few years ago, and the name of that book was written by a Yale psychiatrist and his daughter, who's a comedian. The name of the book was F Feelings. And it's talking about exactly what I'm talking about right now. If you can take your feelings and put them where they need to be, and don't waste that emotional capital on how you feel, but really focus on trying to use that emotional capital to solve the problem, you'll be much, much better off. But that's not something that's easily done. Intuitively, as human beings, we are controlled to a great extent by how we feel. But learning to control how you feel and also forcing yourself to think about what you need to do to solve the problem. So this happened. So what? Now what? Becomes the thinking. And if you can do that, continue to train yourself, you become not only in control of your life, but in control of your destiny and those things around you. Your feelings get in the way. They're useful at certain times, but don't let them drive you to how you feel and control your life. This is even more dangerous now in terms of the digital natives in the world we live in with social media and influence and the dopamine effect, all those things that we know are affecting how we feel, the fear of missing out. It's unbelievable now with regard to social media and people's lives, how they get caught up into how they feel, comparing themselves to other people. All of that puts you in a vulnerable situation that's not healthy. You have to learn how to control your thinking, which controls how you deal with things in an incremental approach to life. Not easily done, though, Charles.
I can imagine. And I got to say this. Since the last time you were on the show, and even up to now, I want to tell you that as I not only reflect by going back and looking at that last show, but to have you here present now, I want to tell you that your story and how you've navigated life to this point for yourself is very inspirational to me. And the reason why I wanted, I want to say that, well, that's leading into this next question, is that, just when you think about leadership, we know there's various ways of how people lead. Everybody does it different. But when I think about, how you were just able to navigate and, from that educational perspective to not just, I'm not going to say simplify because nothing's really simple, but you were able to make that pattern. You were able to make that path, going forward, that it allowed you an enormous amount of opportunities that you have now for what you're doing. But how did writing that memoir transform your perspective on leadership?
I learned a long time ago that there's leadership theory and there's lived experience as a leader. And to learn the difference between being a manager and a leader, but being well equipped as both was critical. That started with my lessons at the military academy and also all the training that I got at FedEx. I learned how to be a servant leader. And I saw that servant leadership model instilled in me from my mom, who was a actual waitress and did other things to serve other people. My godmother cleaned people's houses. But in the end, becoming a servant leader and sharing what I have started the whole core part of me in my DNA that makes me a servant leader. And so about servant leader, you can study leadership, you can think the theory, but to me, leadership in the end, even now, especially since I published the book, I've learned leadership is a way of life. Every single opportunity in your life is an opportunity to be able to lead. It doesn't just start in the job. Being a good son, being a good father, being a good member of your sorority or your fraternity, being a good cousin, being able to lead. You don't have to have a ton of resources, but the one thing you must and should always remember is that every single day you have an opportunity to impact someone's life, even if it's just a kind word or telling somebody where to go to get a resource. Leadership is a way of life. And you begin to start living your life in such a way that you really realize that we're here to serve. And so by serve others, I don't mean that you've got to be in a giant corporation to serve. You can serve every single day with your neighbors, with your church, with your friends. So it becomes a way of life. And that has become more crystallized in my mind since I published the novel more than anything else in the world. Because how you live every single day matters. It matters to the people around you. In the movie, It's a Wonderful Life, you begin to see that once George wishes that he was dead, and he goes back and replays the film in his head, and he sees all the holes that would have been left in other people's lives because he lived. If he were not alive, how their lives would have turned out. Well, it's the same thing with all of us. Your life matters, your story matters, and the way you live and the way you serve It's not just something you learn in a book, it's how you live every single day.
So, what messages do you hope readers take away from your book?
I thought you never asked, sir. So it starts with what we talked about a little bit earlier, Charles. We're all recovering. So my trauma is just as important as your trauma, and I don't do comparative suffering. We're all recovering from something, right? But we're not going to be a part of the Victim Olympics. Number one, that's the first thing. Servant leadership, as I said, is another thing. It's a way of life. Send that elevator back down. I don't care. In the most simple way, help as much as you can, anytime that you can. Develop a personal board of directors. And that means that there's a circle that you turn to professionally, someone you turn to spiritually, someone you turn to financially, someone you turn to create that board of directors to help you through your life. And it's not always the same person. So a very small circle of people that can guide you spiritually, financially, personally, and professionally, that's your personal board of directors. Real estate matters. Where you're born, your zip code can determine your health status and how long you live. So Frederick Douglass said that judge me not by the height of what you achieve, but by the depth of your climb. And some of us had to start from way behind the 8 ball, beyond the bottom of the hill. How far you had to come in order to be able to get to where you are is the only thing you should be measuring, and not comparing yourself to other people. The other thing that I think that I want readers to learn and people to know is that the first rule of survival is to survive. As I mentioned before, I can't help you if I'm dead, so I got to learn how to survive within the system, and then be able to affect change from within, to create policy, to be able to do things from within the system, and not stand on the outside and criticize those people that are in the arena. It's lonely at the top. Trust me. When you're the only one in the room and you look around and there's no one behind you to charge the hill, get used to being alone, but also comfortable with who you are in your own authenticity, and keep moving. You're going to have financial setbacks. You're going to have family setbacks and trauma. You have to be careful that this whole idea of, I call it Lady D, depression doesn't set in. That's a real thing when you're faced with trauma, when you're faced with setbacks. And depression is a funny thing. I call her Lady D. She sneaks into the room. She sits down with you. She sleeps with you. The next thing you know, you don't want to get out off the couch and do anything else. So watch out for Lady D. Continue to live your life. Take care of yourself physically and mentally, because you're no good to anyone if you don't take care of yourself. And to keep moving, and also understand that the mask that we wear, in terms of how we have to sometimes downplay parts of who we are in terms of our authenticity, that mask becomes a cumulative weight, and it gets heavier and heavier the more you achieve and the more success and the longer you live. But also understand that to counterbalance that with staying active physically and mentally.
So can you tell us how do you define authenticity in storytelling?
I define authenticity by telling the truth. You may not be able to tell, where I was born or where I went to school by the way I talk, but you're always going to hear inside of me that I was born and raised in the projects of Memphis, Tennessee, that I learned some of my greatest lessons on survival and how to survive in the world from people on the streets. I also learned from gang members. And so that authenticity follows me into the boardroom. It follows me into every aspect of my career. You're always going to hear that aspect of who I am, because authentically, that makes me who I am. And I'm very proud of the fact that I had to come from those circumstances to where I am today. And like Frederick Douglass said, and I said earlier, that judge your height not by the height of where I've achieved and where I am now, but by the depth of the climb, where I had to start at the bottom of the hill. Some of us have to start further behind the 8 ball. So the authenticity is going to come out of me at just who I am. That's core to my being. Poor kid from North Memphis.
Mm. So what parallels exist between your life and the themes in your memoir?
Yeah, it's all part of a parallel story.
Mm-hmm.
Everything that you do, as I said earlier, is connected to everything else that you end up doing. Many times you can't see the connection because you're going through it. You may feel like you're being traumatized, but you can't see how would I know that when I was a young kid and we would get the vaccines in school, or sometimes the vaccine van would come around in the neighborhood, how would I know that years later I would end up being in a position as a member of the senior executive service, signing the actual contract to help create vaccines being delivered in real time. That's a full circle moment. So those things are all connected. And also, you have to realize that sometimes you can't see those connections, but the key is to continue to keep moving and to continue to be your authentic self. And doors will open in front of you, but you can't focus on the ones that are closed. You got to train yourself to make sure that you don't get caught up into comparing your life to others and to keep moving. That's what I learned from my mom. Even though sometimes she was in an abusive relationship, she kept moving. She went to work and she wouldn't let us be still either. And so the guidance counselors and the teachers all along the way, keep moving physically and mentally.
Mm. So, how did you balance vulnerability with strength in your writing?
I've been a student of Brene Brown for a number of years now, and one of the things that she espouses is vulnerability as a strength. I also learned this in my leadership lessons at FedEx, that I don't have to be perfect. As long as I'm doing what I think is right by my people and trying to do the right thing, and then that vulnerability, I don't have to be perfect. I think I gave the story last time about, one day, we went to work. We would go to happy hours before going to work, and I went in and I was kind of torn up on the job, and they covered for me. They sent me home and made sure that I didn't get fired. That's because I was a good team leader, and I tried to do the right things by making sure that they had what they needed in terms of the resources on the job. But if you understand that and learn that vulnerability is a strength, I learned that from my mom. I've learned that from my wife. I've learned that from my sisters. At the end of the day, I don't have to be perfect. I do have to be authentic, and I do have to have integrity, and I do have to be about doing the right thing. That in turn, that vulnerability will take you miles and miles in success and in your life.
Mm. What advice would you give aspiring authors who want to tell their truth?
I tell authors even as recently as this week, writing is a process. You have to create a discipline. Every Friday, I spend, like I said, 2 hours doing two things. Number one, the recalibration of who I am and reinventing myself. Reinvention becomes a way of life, but writing is a process. So throughout the week, I take my phone with me. If I'm watching a TV show, I'm listening to the radio, or I hear something that's interesting, I record it. Right now, I have over 4,000 recordings on my memo function on my phone. Once a week, I write those memos and those words down on a yellow sheet of paper. Yellow stimulates creativity. Don't use white paper. Use a yellow sheet of paper. Write those words down. Write those thoughts down. And if you do that, even if you only commit to write, one paragraph a month, at the end of the month, you got 12 paragraphs. So you have the beginning of a book. Create an incremental process where you begin to dedicate a certain amount of time to actually writing, but you have to have the discipline to do that. Even if it's just 1 hour a week, write those things down, be consistent about it, have a ritual. I don't do it on a Saturday. I don't do it on a Monday. My day is on Fridays. And the reason you want to make sure that you do it on the same day is because you begin to create muscle memory and you begin to create a ritual so that if life keeps lifing during the week and I'm thrown off balance, on Friday mornings, I've got the time to catch up, to recalibrate, to sharpen my saw, and to use that time to write those thoughts down that I've been recording every single day. It's a process. Create that process for yourself.
So, how has your book influenced your speaking engagements?
It is allowing me to be able to have platforms to reach audiences that I haven't had the freedom to be able to do in the past. So I'm going to do, for example, on May 4th at The Manor in Atlanta, a Mastermind Monday. As I mentioned before, I'm going back to do a mentoring circle with the people at the CDC and the National Center for Immunization and Respiratory Diseases. And there are other speaking engagements on the horizon that I will be able to influence and be able to share my story, my narrative. My ultimate goal is to do a TED Talk. As a matter of fact, as of today, Charles, we submitted a proposal to do a TED Talk here in Atlanta. So that's always been eyes on the prize for me. And to be able to go from local audiences to city by city audience to a national audience, that's the journey that I'm on.
Mm. And so, what does the ghost at the table symbolize to you personally?
The ghost at the table symbolizes who I am, where I came from, and why I must continue to be able to speak for the people that aren't in the rooms and the platforms that I'm in and on. And so the ghost symbolizes that GPS inside of me that has always been with me, that has been refined over the years to understand the responsibility that goes along with the ghosts, speaking for the folk that aren't in the room and for my ancestors. So it symbolizes the core of who I am authentically and where I come from. Hello? Kim, I think we lost connection. Kim. We lost the connection here, sir. We lost the connection, sir.
Go to your go to the internet. Go back to the internet.
Safari.
No.
No, I had to make a change.
Oh, was that you?
Yes, I had to make a change. I was telling you to hold on a second.
Okay.
Yes, sir. So when we let me ask you this. With the book tour that you're going on now as well,
Mm-hmm.
and just thinking about some of those things that we just talked about, what are some of the things that you're hoping to gain more from when engaging with your audience? That is when I'm sure there's going to be questions and things they'd like to know more about you as well as your journey. What are some of the things that you are thinking that you can give back to your audience that's going to be so impactful that, I'm sure that it's going to bring on more and more of people wanting to have the opportunity to just be in the same space with you?
I mean, to me, that's what it's all about. The more people that can be in that space, the more people that I can interact with, the greater I think I can help change lives. But more importantly, one of the things that I look forward to the most is to hear their stories. Because as I continue to learn and as I continue to interact and engage in the community, it inspires me to continue what I'm doing on this journey. So more importantly, not necessarily what I get from them, not what they get from me, but what I get from them. There's a reciprocity. There's nothing like being in front of an audience and connecting with people and sharing authentic stories. To me, that's the fuel and the food of life.
So let's transition over a little bit to let's talk a little bit about your corporate leadership and transformation. At that point,
Mm-hmm.
can you tell us what were some of the biggest challenges you faced as a senior VP and COO at FedEx?
In the movie Lincoln, it's based on the book by Doris Kearns Goodwin, Team of Rivals. I want to go with that theme, Team of Rivals. I came into the federal government as a member of the Senior Executive Service, as you know how that's the equivalent to being an admiral or general. And I came in from the outside. People spend their whole careers trying to become an SES. Here I am coming in from the outside at that level. So I spent 20 years as a member of the Senior Executive Service. And just like Lincoln, everybody in my leadership cadre, in my direct chain of command, thought that they deserved the job more than me. And so right off the bat, I'm dealing with some forms of sabotage, some forms of trying to make sure that I was not successful, spies and assassins everywhere. And so that was okay with me because the only defense you have against those types of forces is to remain authentically who you are, to be honest in what you do and try to do the right thing, and to continue to try to make sure that you help as many people as you can and have integrity about what you do. And more importantly, like Dr. King said, the antidote to racism is excellence. You can say that you've been in this organization longer than I, but you're never going to be able to say that you know my job better than me. Excellence matters.
Right. So how did you lead a $2 billion division through change and growth?
Understanding leadership from a psychological and sociological standpoint. Go to back in the leadership textbook, and you can see sociology and psychology. The basic thing, though, is to understand Maslow's hierarchy of needs. That we all have these needs to be safe, to have food, to be secure. But the third level of need, to belong, to make sure that you create an environment where people have what they need and they can belong to be part of that pack. That's part of our DNA, to be a part of something greater than us. Creating an environment where people feel like they can bring their authentic selves to work and have what they need in terms of resources. That in turn allows you to be able to manage and lead anywhere. Doesn't matter if it's the private sector or the federal government. Everybody has those basic hierarchical needs that Maslow outlined, and that we all want to feel like we're part of the team and that our leader cares about who we are.
What strategies help you build high performing teams?
I go back to the Leadership Bible for me, which is the Leadership Challenge book by Posner and Kouzes. If you look at that book, I used it in 1998 and have used it as a Bible in leadership classes that I've taught around the world. You first have to be able to model the way, walk the talk. Ultimately, beyond that, you create a shared vision. You challenge the process, you inspire the heart, and you enable other people to act. Those behavioral traits are scientifically proven to give you the tools in your toolbox you'll need no matter where you go and who you lead. Those are the things that have been proven through science and evidence that if you do these things, you'll be a good leader. Those things in the book, The Leadership Challenge by Posner and Kouzes, the leadership blueprint in the Bible for me.
So, as you were building that process, when did you realize the emphasis on building teams in order to make the system work?
Well, you know as well as I do that, there's no I in team at the end of the day. More important, let's go back to my life. The village matters. It takes a village to raise a child. Well, my village was my godparents and my wife and my family and my circle of friends. It takes a village to make me who I am, and all of us need that village around us. You can go a long way by yourself, but you'll never achieve true success unless you have a support system in place. And once you have the support system in place, keep that village intact and nurture it and pay attention to it, because the village is the key. And the village, in essence, becomes your team in life and in work.
When I look at things today and how we have the functionalities, of what's happening here in the country.
Mm-hmm.
When I look at, a process and what's supposed to be a process that actually is supposed to be that do-all, we know that there's always been a shortfall, but
Mm-hmm.
when you look at some of the functionalities of how things are operating today, it's clear that it's not about leadership, it's not about teams, it's not about culture, it's about something else. When people that are looking for that inspiration and they don't see that, what are some of the things that we can do to get that to them, because it's not going to be at hand?
I think, like I said, we all have an opportunity to be able to influence other people's lives every single day in terms of leadership being a way of life. The other thing that we have to do is I limit the amount of news that I ingest on any given day, because I don't want to drink that poison every single day, but I do need to remain situationally aware. And so I give the news 30 minutes a day, but then I go out and I sharpen my saw. I live my life. I invest in my community and engage with the people and the lives around me. I learned a long time ago when I taught Stephen Covey 7 Habits that the woodcutters who would compete every day, one woodcutter would beat the other one all the time, even though he took 2 hours off. He'd go sharpen his saw. I go sharpen my saw. I hike and I have other hobbies. I write. I do other things. I love movies. I'm a cinephile in terms of film. But at the end of the day, sharpening your saw, engaging with your family is as important as anything else that you will do. So you have to calibrate that and make sure that that's just important, taking care of yourself psychologically as well as physically. And don't drink the poison today in the digital world by turning on the news and getting sucked into that vortex. It's important to be aware, but I can only control certain things. And learning how, from a Stephen Covey 7 Habits standpoint, control things that are within my sphere of control, and then to calibrate myself so that I don't let my emotions drive my thinking and my life.
Mm. So, as you mentioned community, let's talk a little bit about your community engagement and your legacy. First of all, can you tell us, how do you define community empowerment?
I'll give you a good example. I'm currently the vice chairman of the Family Health Centers of Georgia. The Family Health Centers of Georgia. We provide health care to the folk who are marginalized and really don't have an ability to pay. But that, to me, that kind of community engagement where you're able to change people's lives by giving them health care, even though many of them can't afford health care, is an impact and a legacy that, you know, you can't even put a price on. When I was in Memphis, I was chairman of the Housing and Finance Board for the city of Memphis, creating over $200 million in bonds to help restructure the landscape of North Memphis so that there was affordable housing. And we taught people how to sustain that. So community engagement, you can make a difference. You can make a difference on any given day. If it's somebody that just needs a resource or direction or guidance, you can engage at any level, even with your own families. That even is even more important by being able to change those who are in change lives of the people that are in close proximity. So don't think you can't be a change agent. You're given this gift every single day. Even if you don't feel like you have much, you still have something to share, and your story matters more than anything else. And we need to hear those stories and share them with each other and show that I'm not perfect, that many times in my life I've been vulnerable, but as Brene Brown has taught me, vulnerability is a strength.
What drives your commitment to equity and inclusion?
For the first 5 years, I was the chief management officer or the chief operating officer for the Coordinating Center for Infectious Diseases. And that's where we work to restructure modern vaccine supply chain. For the last 15 years, I was the Equal Employment Opportunity Officer for the CDC. And that fight was all about making sure that from a policy standpoint, that we tried to ensure that there was no discrimination in the workplace, that people who had disabilities had accommodations to make sure that they could be successful. The last 15 years of my life in the workplace have been dedicated to equal opportunity and equity, and working with my partners on the scientific side to help create and structure programs that provide health equity for those disparities that exist that you and I know are real.
Mhm. So, how do you engage with younger generations of leaders?
Same way I'm doing now. I reach out. I talk to a lot of different people on any given day. I'm in a lot of different places. Someone once told me that you need to have friends in almost every decade of life. You need some younger friends, you need some middle-aged friends, you need some older friends. If I turn around and look in the room and everybody's my age and I'm in an echo chamber, something's wrong. So I purposely go out and do different things in terms of the community and also in the places that I visit and the people that I know to make sure that I have that diversity of generational aspects in my life.
So, what role does mentorship play in your legacy?
That I have mentored a lot of different people, and that when I mentor people, I know for a fact that one of the conditions is that they go out and do the same thing, to pass the baton. So everyone that I interact with, I make it perfectly clear to them that you have to do this for someone else, paying it forward. And to me, that's the legacy. But not only that, but the way I've raised my daughters and my family, the people that I interact with, that legacy, they know, and I see them repeating the same thing by going out and paying it forward. To me, that's what really matters.
How do you see leadership evolving in today's social climate?
The greatest challenge I think that we have from a leadership perspective in this climate is generational leadership. We got 5 or 6 different generations in the workplace. You have to have leaders that can communicate and connect across generations so that the ability to be able to meet people where they are and to respect people who they are and not who you want them to be. That generational leadership aspect is critical. We need to be able to train our leaders and our managers to be able to connect and meet people where they are so that they can give people what they need situationally to be the most successful. So your generational leadership skills are critical now more than ever because of all the generations in the workplace. Someone my age might be looking at something very different in the workplace than someone who is just starting out. But I have to meet you where you are and create a reciprocal relationship that allows you to be your best and also helps me to get best out of you for the organization. Generational leadership is, I believe, the greatest challenge we have right now in the workplace.
Mm. Yeah, I would say that is the case because for some strange reason, for a lot of people, it seems like there's just a disconnect. But the disconnect is like the communications are so different that nobody's actually hearing, listening, or seeing that there's a miscommunication. How can we make that better?
I think by training our leaders and our managers to be able to communicate effectively, and also uh, learning to listen, not just for a response, but to listen for true understanding. And that's one of the things that you learn in Seven Habits from Stephen Covey, is listening not just to respond, but listen to really truly understand. And so if we can help train our leaders and our managers and our teachers and our employees and our children to listen, to be able to hear the other person's side of the story, then I think it helps us to be a better world. I think that what has changed in the world is now that if you're in a different political party, for example, if you have a different thought, that makes you an enemy to some extent in this world, in this digital world. That's not the case. I want to hear what the other side has to say. I want to understand what the other side has to say. Even if I don't agree with them, at the end of the day, I've given them the attention and tried to understand. But the true progress is made when we meet in the middle. I might not agree with you. I might not like what you think and how you approach things from a policy standpoint, but that doesn't make you the enemy.
No, it does not. But in this climate, people are looking to make more enemies than they are to make friends.
Say that one more time.
I said in today's climate, people are looking to make more enemies than they are friends.
Yes and no. I think part of it has to do with the digital world and the world of social media, but I just refuse to buy into that toxicity. You're right. If you listen and turn on the news, you think it's the apocalypse and the world has come to an end, but it's not. If you go out and engage in the world, you'll see that it's a very different story. So be careful what you watch and what you ingest and what you listen to, but also go out and experience it yourself. And you'll find that for the most part, there are decent people in the world, and we're more alike than we are different.
Yeah, so, what does civic responsibility mean to you?
It means exactly what we've been talking about today, Charles, just realizing that even though I might be successful in one sense of the word, everybody's not successful. And the more I can help make it better for everyone along the way, the better off we are as a world. So I can't live in an insular bubble and ignore the fact that there are poor people, there are struggling people, there are hungry people. I was talking to a young lady on a hiking trip just last week, and I asked her, she was one of the waitresses in the restaurant, how do you spend your time? What do you do for enjoyment? She said, I like to go window shopping. She said, I like to go window shopping. I said, where do you like to shop? She said, at Walmart. If your world, my heart goes out to her, because if her world, her whole day was about window shopping at Walmart, what a different story that is from a lot of us. And to really appreciate and have empathy for a person like that, even though I might be living one life, this person right here in front of me is suffering and might be challenged. That empathy allows me to go back and try to make a difference, not only with her, but also with the people I interact with on an everyday. A reminder that, our success doesn't mean that everyone else is successful. We have a responsibility, especially if we are successful, to help those that aren't.
So, how can leaders bridge the divides in communities?
By communicating, by talking, by making sure that we focus on those things that are important as we continue to try to change the community for the better. Creating schools, creating programs, by making sure that there are mentoring activities. I have friends right now that are engaged in church activity to try to make sure young men know how to dress for success and how to do an interview. Wherever you can make a difference in terms of the community, divides, it goes way across the color line. And that breaks down the barriers that are right in front of us. Because if you listen to what you hear in the news, everybody's an enemy, but that's not the truth. People are people. Maslow's hierarchy of needs is real. Everybody wants to feel like they belong, that they're a part of something larger than them, and that they have what they need to be successful in life. Everybody's still a human being, despite anything that you hear, despite artificial intelligence, whatever. Everybody's still human. Inspire the heart.
What advice would you give to those seeking purpose-driven careers?
You first have to have a purpose-driven life. And by that, I mean, I always ask people, what is your ultimate career goal? So sometimes people have an answer for that and sometimes they don't. But you may not discover your purpose right away. You have to have some lived experience to be able to get to where you think you understand what your purpose is. You may think it's one thing and it ends up being something else, but sometimes that happens through serendipity. Sometimes it happens from the beginning of your life. Like, for example, people that from a child know they want to be a doctor or they want to be an engineer. Well, most of us, a lot of times, our lives and our careers meander. One door closes, we go through another door, and the next thing you know, you're somewhere else. I had no idea that I'd be the chief operating officer of a guitar company at one point in my life. I had no idea that I'd be a chief operating officer in the infectious diseases organization at the CDC. But you learn your purpose through lived experiences and through life. And that doesn't always come easy. But eventually, when it hits you intuitively, you'll know when it is. And it's different for all of us.
So, when you think about, from driven down, going down into delving down into helping communities,
Mm-hmm.
when you were in public service, what were some of the things in public service that inspired you to be more of a public servant?
When I became the chief management officer for the Coordinating Center for Infectious Diseases, we were able to do program reviews around the world. To go to Africa, in Kisumu or in Kenya, and to see the conditions that people live in, to see the kind of poverty that I was able to see when I went to India. When you see that kind of suffering and that kind of poverty, but you see people from the CDC and from other organizations like the National Institutes of Health in the middle of those communities, sometimes even living in those communities, making a difference in those people's lives. You realize you're not nearly doing enough, but you have to be able to see the world and to have empathy and to experience it. That's what made me even more committed, by being able to actually see it up close and personal.
So, so at that time while you were doing that work, what were some of your key priorities as the senior executive, and how do you use those today?
So when I first came to the CDC, when I was in infectious diseases, I remember going to Washington, D.C., and we went to a meeting, and I think it was President Bush at the time who gave us what's known as the PEPFAR funds to help combat AIDS, and being able to have the responsibility when we went back to our headquarters to make sure that those funds were expended correctly, that they were spent on the programs, that they made a difference in terms of appropriations law. Having the discipline to make sure that from a management standpoint, planning, organizing, staffing, developing, and controlling, those are the things that came into play in my public health service, especially during the infectious disease days, to try to make sure that those funds were used what they were supposed to use and making a difference, and having in place evidence-based measures to show that there was a return on us being able to do that, that the money was being spent correctly. So understanding those responsibilities by being a good manager. When you go to school in management, you learn your planning, organizing, staffing, developing, controlling. Those are the disciplines in management. Those are the disciplines that I learned at FedEx. Those things helped me in public service to make sure that I was a good manager, to make sure that those things were being used appropriately.
So, when you think about that leadership that you had as a public servant, is there a difference in public service leadership and community leadership?
Hell, hell yeah. let me let me clarify that, sir. So you could not have prepared me going from effects in the community in Memphis and in Buffalo, New York, to what I would experience going into the federal sector. I had to learn very quickly that there's a different set of leadership skills that are required in the federal sector, in the public sector, to be successful. So, for example, having true managerial authority. Your board of directors in the federal government might be Congress or the Senate. We don't necessarily move in all aspects at the speed of business. One thing you have to have, regardless of that, is legislative leadership skills. That means that even though I don't necessarily move at the speed of business, even though I may not have true managerial authority, I do have to have the ability to be able to build allies, to be able to get things done through my influence. And those are legislative leadership skills that only come through the lived experience. So yeah, it's a very different world, having to live through that, but also have to be successful in that. And so the book by Jim Collins, not Good to Great, but Good to Great in the Social Sectors, which was the second book, to me, that's the Bible that gave me what I needed to understand how to get things done despite these perceived barriers in terms of how we operate from a federal sector standpoint. So it's very different leading in the not-for-profit sector and the federal sectors. Legislative leadership skills are the key and the key to the algorithm in terms of success.
Well, so let me just tell you the premise of asking that question was, the complexities. Are the complexities the same?
No, absolutely not. No, I mean, there are layers and layers of things that we do and have done in the federal government that many times were created years ago, right? But sometimes they're still doing them. I learned this when I was fortunate enough for FedEx to send me to MIT to take some systems thinking classes with the guru of systems thinking at the time, Peter Senge. So in that, I learned that you have to first understand yourself, as we talked about, to be able to relate to others. Then once you understand yourself, you understand how the systems within which we operate have influence on us. And so if I want to make a change systematically, I first have to understand that there are certain things that organizations do, just like people. Organizations behave just like people do. They're balancing and reinforcing loops, but being able to take a helicopter view and understand how these systems operate and knowing where to spend your time and effort on the high leverage things that are going to make the greatest difference instead of so many other things that could be perceived as barriers. If you go back and look at, many of the policies that you have sometimes in the federal government or in other organizations, people are doing it just because they've done it for a long time. Who said that was the right thing to do, or that is still relevant? So, challenging the process is one of those things that I mentioned from Posner and Cousins and leadership challenges. On any given day, Charles, if somebody wasn't glad to see me come in or happy to see me leave, I'm not doing my job. Challenging the process, but doing it in a way that doesn't destroy your career, but also inspires people to follow you. That's a skill you have to learn through lived experience.
So your time at the CDC, what impact are you most proud of while you was working there?
There are several things, but I'll start with the fact I'm working on trying to modernize vaccine supply chain before I got there. One of the things that got me to the CDC was my experience at FedEx and supply chain logistics. So I came in as the chief management officer or the chief operating officer for that for infectious diseases. I ended up actually being the guy who signed the contract to create what we have now. Now, to make that long story short, there were over 400 vaccine depots around the country. Every state had their own way of delivering vaccines. Supply chain visibility was, non-existent. Now, that contract is still in place. And guess what? We have 3 strategic depots around the country, and the vaccines are now delivered in real time, just like a FedEx package. I'm proud of that because those vaccines save lives here and around the world. That's one of the things that I'm most proud of. But even more importantly, the people that I work with at the CDC are some of the greatest people I've ever met in my life. People around the clock putting their life on the line. The employees that are committed to these diseases and doing surveillance and epidemiology. I'm proud of the fact that being able to have been a part of that and to run programs that save lives. The other things that I'm most proud of, and the people I was able to influence from a mentoring perspective that are still doing what I did by running mentoring circles and mentoring others.
Wow. So, for over your career, and you've been in
Mm-hmm.
several different industries, and you've just been just doing all of this different forms of leadership. When you look at today as you're carrying forward in your life, how do you take all of those experiences and you navigate those to continue to persevere and to make lives as easy for people that are following you that want to learn these systems? How do you do that?
I do that by doing what I do every single day. When I wake up in the morning, I'm very thankful for the fact that I'm still alive. I'm thankful for the fact that I'm still in my right mind. And I think about what is it that I can do today that's going to not only help others, but to make a difference in the world. And I don't have to solve world peace, but I do have to, every single day, with the lives and the people that I interact with, try to do the right thing and try to make sure that if there's something I can do to help make their lives better, do that whenever you can. For example, with the young lady that had the talked about window shopping at Walmart, my wife will tell you, when I go out, I talk to people and learning what she needed, where she was in school, pointing out some resources that might be available to her to help her in her life to get beyond what she was doing in that situation on the hiking trip. Every single day, you have an opportunity to be able to do that and be sincere about it. I'm not just asking because I'm nosy. I'm asking because I care. And people will know that right off the bat, whether or not you're being sincere and whether you're not. So don't pass up those opportunities. Don't get so caught up in thinking that you have challenges in front of you, but there's somebody here that can still use you in a helpful way, and just don't ignore the doors that are open in front of you to be able to do that every single day.
So, when as we wound down here, how do you want to be remembered as a leader?
One more time, Charles, you broke us a little bit there.
I said, how do you
Say that
want to
again.
be remembered as a leader? How do you want to be remembered as a leader?
Okay, I want to be remembered as a leader. The fact that I modeled the way, I lived the example. I don't have a bucket list. I've been living my bucket list for the last years. Buddha said, and I was in Hong Kong this past February, and I went to actually visit Great Buddha, the statue. And one of the things that Buddha said is, the trouble is you think you have time. You don't know. I could do everything right and still die tomorrow. And so, as a leader, I want my legacy and to be remembered by the fact that I did just that. I lived my life to the fullest. I worked hard, I lived well, and I did good deeds along the way.
Mm. So, what's next for Reginald Mebane?
I want to continue to write. I want to continue to speak, and I will do some fractional consulting here and there, but only on my schedule and my time. And so, books, boards, speeches, and fractional consulting, to me, that'll run me to the end of time.
Mm. So, in closing, what are some words of wisdom and encouragement that you'd like to leave with our audience, and also how they can connect with you via social media, your websites, how to get the book, how they can get out to the book tour?
We're going to share that information when we finish the interview, so they'll be able to go to WP Publishing, or they can reach out to me on LinkedIn. That is the best way. Reginald Mebane on LinkedIn. And I guarantee you, if you reach out to me, I take a lot of pride in making sure that I respond. So you reach out to me on LinkedIn. Also, we're going to share the book information about how people can order the book and all about the book tour. We're going to share that with you so you can share it with the audience. But more importantly, the thing that gives me life, the thing that inspires me is when people reach out and I have the ability to be able to connect with them and learn what their challenges are so that I continue to try to make sure that I put back in the world and in the community. And in terms of words of wisdom that I want to leave the audience with, I'm going to go back to my guy, Frederick Douglass. He said that there's no struggle, then there's no progress. He also said that once you learn to read, you're forever free. He also said that power concedes nothing without demand, and that he prayed for his freedom with his legs. In other words, he was a runaway slave. And last and certainly not least, I've said it several times here today, you want to be judged not by the height of what you achieve, but by the depth of your climb. So many of us have had to start behind the eight ball at the bottom of the hill, or even beyond that. It's how far you've had to climb. Don't compare anyone else, only yourself with yourself. Over.
Well, I want to say before I close with, I have a closing monologue that I'm going to read, but before I close, I want to say that I appreciate you for being back here again for a second time, and I'm really happy and proud of the work that you're going to be doing, especially on your tour. And I definitely plan to attend because I think that's one of the moments that really is more than just celebrating life, but it's celebrating an accomplishment in a way that I think is beneficial for everyone that has come to or to be a part of an underserved and marginalized community to understand growth. And so, with my closing, I want to say that as we close tonight's conversation, we reflect on the power of transformation, the ability to rise, rebuild, and redefine what leadership means. Reginald Mebane's journey reminds us that greatness is not born from privilege, but from perseverance. His story is a mirror for every dreamer who dares to climb, every leader who chooses integrity over comfort, and every community that believes in the power of purpose. In America in Black and White, we honor those who lead with truth, clarity, and tonight we celebrate a man whose legacy continues to inspire generations. I'm your host, Charles King. This is America in Black and White. I want to thank you, Reggie, and I want to thank everyone that was out here watching tonight for another great show. We will see you guys tomorrow. And I will say, do you have a couple of minutes here after I close the show, sir?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, sir.